Her brothers took everything, but forgot the carriage house their father left her. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or completely counted out, then this story is for you. I want you to hit that subscribe button because we're going to talk about what it means to find your own strength, not in the places people tell you to look, but in the places they forget to. This isn't just my story. It's a story for anyone who has ever had to build a home out of the pieces someone else threw away. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to be a problem for the state of Illinois. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box and a handshake from a woman who had been my caseworker for the last 2 years. Her name was Ms. Albright. She had a perpetually tired look in her eyes, the kind you see in people who spend their lives trying to plug a dam with their fingertips. She handed me a large manila envelope. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, and a final check for $175. The official severance package from a childhood spent in the system. "That's it then, Chloe," she said, her voice flat but not unkind. We were standing in the linoleum-tiled foyer of the Grayson Group Home for Girls, a place that had smelled faintly of bleach and boiled vegetables for the entire 730 days I'd lived there. The air was institutional, scrubbed of any personality, just like the girls who cycled through it. We learned to be quiet, to be small, to not take up space. We learned that wanting things was a liability. "Thank you, Ms. Albright," I said. The words felt like stones in my mouth. Thank you for what? For the curfew? For the mandatory group therapy sessions where we all lied about our progress? For the constant, humming anxiety of knowing you were just a file in a cabinet, a line item on a budget? But she was just a person doing a job, and I knew she'd done more for me than most. She'd looked at me like I was a person, at least. That was something. "There's a bed for you at the North Side shelter," she continued, consulting a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand. "It's paid for 1 week. After that, you'll need to work with their counselors to find employment. There's a bus ticket in the envelope." I nodded, clutching the handle of the cardboard box. It contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a handful of paperback books I'd read until their spines were broken, and a small, framed photo of my father and me at a county fair. He was holding me on his shoulders, and we were both laughing. It was taken a year before he got sick, 2 years before he died, 3 years before my brothers, Mark and Stephen, had our family home sold and informed the state that there was no one left to care for their 15-year-old sister. "One last thing," Ms. Albright said, pausing as I was about to turn away. She reached into a different folder on her desk and pulled out a crisp, white business envelope. It looked expensive, made of thick, creamy paper that was completely out of place in this drab office. My name, Chloe Easton, was typed neatly on the front. "This came for you yesterday, from a law firm." I took it from her. It felt heavy, important. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. A law firm? The only lawyers I'd ever known were the court-appointed ones who spoke in jargon and never made eye contact. "Do you know what it's about?" She shook her head, her expression unreadable. "I have no idea. The return address is from your old hometown, though, Barrington Hills." The name of the town landed like a punch. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 3 years. It was another world, a place of sprawling lawns and old money, the place I was from but no longer belonged to. The place my brothers still lived, like kings in the castle they'd stolen. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Whatever this was, it was probably a mistake. Or worse, a final, bureaucratic insult from my brothers, some legal notice to formally disown me. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I slid the letter into the manila envelope with the rest of my life's paperwork. I didn't want to open it here. I didn't want the answer, good or bad, to be witnessed by the pale green walls of the Grayson home. "Good luck, Chloe," Ms. Albright said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine warmth crossed her face. "You're tougher than you think." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the biting wind of a Chicago October, I didn't feel tough. I felt like a ghost. I was 18 years old, officially an adult, and I had a box of clothes, $175, and a one-way bus ticket to a homeless shelter. The wind whipped my hair across my face, and I pulled my thin jacket tighter. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Each step felt like I was walking further and further away from any world I had ever known, into a vast, empty space. I clutched the envelope in my pocket. It was the only mystery I had left. The bus smelled like wet wool and exhaust fumes. I found a seat by a grimy window and watched the city blur past, a smear of gray buildings and hurried faces. I didn't belong to any of it. For 2 hours, I just sat there, the cardboard box on my lap, the manila envelope a heavy weight in my coat pocket. The shelter wasn't a place I was heading to. It was a place I was falling towards. It was the bottom. I couldn't wait any longer. My fingers, numb with cold and anxiety, fumbled with the flap of the expensive-looking envelope. I slid my finger under the seal and ripped it open. The letterhead read, "Henderson and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The paper was so thick it felt like a credential in itself. I unfolded the single sheet and began to read. "Dear Ms. Easton," it started, the language formal and cold. "This letter is to inform you of a matter pertaining to the final will and testament of your late father, Mr. David Easton. While the primary assets of the estate were dispersed in accordance with probate court rulings 2 years ago, a codicil to the will, pertaining to you specifically, has now come into effect upon the occasion of your 18th birthday." My breath hitched. A codicil? A part of the will just for me? My father had been sick for a long time before he died. His last year was a fog of medication and confusion. My brothers had handled everything. They'd told me, in a very brief, sterile meeting with a lawyer I didn't know, that Dad's medical bills had eaten up most of the money. They were selling the house to cover the rest. They were sorry, they'd said, their faces like stone masks. There was nothing left. They had seemed so certain, so final. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Pursuant to your father's directive, a single property, held in a separate trust, was to be transferred to your name upon reaching the age of legal majority. This property is listed in the county records as Lot 7B, the detached carriage house and adjoining 1/10 acre, located at the northeast corner of the original Easton estate at 412 Oakhaven Lane, Barrington Hills. The carriage house. The words didn't even register at first. I remembered it, of course. It was a relic, a 2-story brick building at the far edge of our property, half hidden by a thicket of overgrown maple and oak trees. It was where the groundskeeper had stored lawnmowers and bags of mulch. The upstairs was a small, dusty apartment that hadn't been used in 50 years. It was dilapidated, forgotten, a piece of junk. While my brothers got the sprawling 5-bedroom main house, the investment portfolios, the business my father had built from nothing, I got the shed. A laugh escaped my lips, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Of course, this was exactly the kind of cosmic joke the universe seemed to enjoy playing on me. It was a crumb, a final, pathetic scrap tossed to me from my brother's table, probably for legal reasons, so they could say they'd given me something. The anger was so sudden and hot it almost made me sick. They had taken everything. They had let me go into the system, let me spend 3 years in group homes, convinced I was an orphan with nothing and no one. And they had known about this. They must have. The letter continued. Please be advised that the property is conveyed as is, with all associated responsibilities, including property taxes, which are currently delinquent. The trust contains no liquid assets. We advise you to contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of the deed and your intentions regarding the property. Sincerely, Robert Henderson, Esquire. Delinquent taxes. No money, of course. It wasn't a gift. It was a burden, a debt. They were giving me a bill. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the thick paper resisting, and pressed my forehead against the cold, vibrating glass of the bus window. Tears of frustration and rage burned behind my eyes. For a moment, I let myself imagine them. Mark, with his smug, superior smile, and Stephen, with his cold, appraising eyes. I pictured them in our father's house, sitting in his leather chairs, drinking his expensive scotch, congratulating themselves on their cleverness. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had erased me. And this letter was the final stroke of the pen. I stayed that way for a long time, just feeling the anger, letting it be the only thing that was real. It was better than the emptiness. It was something to hold on to. But then, Ms. Albright's voice echoed in my head. "You're tougher than you think." Was I? What did that even mean? Did it mean I could survive the shelter? Get some dead-end job washing dishes? Was that all my life was supposed to be? Slowly, I straightened up and smoothed the crumpled letter out on my knee. I read it again, more carefully this time. Pursuant to your father's directive. It wasn't from my brothers. It was from my father. He had put this in his will. He had done this specifically for me. Why? Why give me a broken-down garage? It made no sense. Unless there was something more to it. A man who had held me on his shoulders, who had taught me how to read, who had nicknamed me his little spark plug because I was always asking questions. He wouldn't play such a cruel joke, would he? I pulled out the cheap flip phone Ms. Albright had given me, a lifeline with 100 prepaid minutes. I dialed the number for the law firm from the letterhead. It was a long shot, but I had to know. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Henderson and Associates?" "Hello," I stammered, my voice small. "I'd like to speak to Robert Henderson, please. My name is Chloe Easton." There was a pause. I expected to be told he was busy, to be shuffled off to a paralegal. Instead, the receptionist said, "One moment, please." A few seconds later, a calm, deep voice came on the line. "Ms. Easton, this is Robert Henderson. I'm glad you called. I must admit, I wasn't sure if the letter would reach you." "It reached me," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "I don't understand. The Carriage house? Why?" "Your father was a very specific man, Chloe," he said, and the use of my first name was so unexpected, so gentle, that it threw me off balance. His instructions were also very specific. He set up the trust for the Carriage house years before he passed. He wanted it to be separate from the main estate, legally firewalled, so to speak. He stipulated that I was not to contact you until your 18th birthday, and that I was only to provide the information in the letter. "But it's a ruin," I said, the word tasting like ash. "And it has back taxes. I have $175. How am I supposed to do anything with that?" There was another pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a dismissive pause. It felt thoughtful. "I understand your position," Mr. Henderson said finally. "I am legally bound to follow your father's instructions. He was my client, but he was also my friend. He believed you were resourceful. He said you always knew how to find things." Find things? What was that supposed to mean? It sounded like the kind of vague, sentimental thing people say, not a legal strategy. "Find what?" "He didn't tell me, Mr. Henderson replied, his voice steady. "My only instruction was to give you the deed and the key. The rest, he said, was up to you. The key, by the way, is with the property. He told me where he left it. It should be in a magnetic lockbox attached to the back of the electrical meter. A secret key. A cryptic message. It felt like something out of one of the fantasy novels I loved, not real life. It was insane. It was also the first flicker of something other than despair I had felt all day. It was a thread. A tiny, fragile thread in a world that had felt like a smooth, blank wall. "The taxes," I said, my voice shaking a little. "How much?" "2 years' worth. About $800. My heart sank again. $800. It might as well have been $1 million. I could never get that kind of money. "So I'll lose it anyway." "Not necessarily," he said. "The county will send a final notice. You'll have 90 days to pay before they seize the property and put it up for auction." 90 days, Chloe. He said it not like a threat, but like a fact, a deadline, a challenge. The bus was pulling into the depot, the end of the line. I looked out the window at the bleak concrete station. I could get off this bus, walk to the shelter, and try to forget this ever happened. I could throw the letter away and let the carriage house and the last piece of my father be auctioned off to some stranger. Or I could do something else. I could take the other bus, the one that went north, back towards Barrington Hills, back towards the only thing in the world that was mine. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, a decision forming in my mind, as terrifying and exhilarating as jumping off a cliff. "For what?" he asked. "For the information," I said. "I'll be in touch." I hung up the phone. I grabbed my box and my envelope and got off the bus. I didn't walk towards the exit that led to the shelter. I walked over to the ticket counter, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "How much is a one-way ticket to Barrington Hills?" I asked the woman behind the glass. She looked at me, at my cheap jacket and my cardboard box, and a flicker of pity crossed her face. $42, hun." I counted out the money from my envelope, the bills crisp and new. It was a huge chunk of my entire net worth. As she slid the ticket under the glass, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fear. This was crazy. I was walking back into the lion's den with no plan and almost no money. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't just being moved from one box to another. I was making a choice. I was going home, or at least, to the broken piece of it that was left for me. The ride to Barrington Hills was like traveling backward in time. The gray, cramped cityscape of Chicago slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, and then to the lush, manicured landscapes of the ultra-wealthy. The houses got bigger, the lawns wider, the trees older. Every mile marker was a reminder of the life that had been snatched away from me. I remembered driving these roads with my father in his old pickup truck, the windows down, the radio playing classic rock. He'd point out different houses, telling me the stories of the families who lived there. Our family had been one of those stories. Now, I was a ghost haunting the edges of the narrative. The bus dropped me at a small station in the center of the quaint, picturesque town. It was all charming storefronts and expensive boutiques. I felt instantly out of place, my cardboard box a declaration of my otherness. The Easton estate was a 2-mile walk from the station. 2 miles I had to cover on foot, like a pilgrim or a beggar. As I walked, the memories came thick and fast. There was the park where Dad taught me to ride a bike, my knees scraped and bleeding, but my face beaming with pride. There was the little ice cream shop where he'd take me after a good report card. And then, as I turned onto Oak Haven Lane, there was the house itself. It was even bigger and more imposing than I remembered. My brothers had clearly invested money in it. The white paint was fresh, the black shutters were glossy, and the landscaping was immaculate. A brand new black BMW was parked in the circular driveway. It felt like a magazine cover, sterile and perfect. There was no sign of the slightly chaotic, lived-in warmth it had when my father was alive. No muddy boots by the door, no half-finished projects on the porch. It was their house now, not mine. My destination was around the side, down a long gravel path that was now almost completely overgrown. I pushed through tangled branches and wet leaves, the thorns of wild rose bushes catching on my jacket. And then I saw it. The carriage house stood in a pocket of neglect, like a forgotten thought. The brick was dark with age and creeping ivy. The slate roof was sagging in the middle, and a few windows on the second floor were boarded up. It was exactly as Mr. Henderson had described it, a ruin. It was a monument to being forgotten, and it was all mine. My hands were shaking as I walked around to the back. There, just as he'd said, was the electrical meter. I reached behind it, my fingers brushing against cold metal. A small, black magnetic box. It clicked as I pulled it free. Inside, nestled on a bed of crumbling foam, was a single, old-fashioned brass key. It was heavy, ornate, completely unlike the modern keys for the main house. It was a key from another time, my father's time. I took a deep breath and walked to the heavy wooden door on the side of the building. The key slid into the lock with a grating sound. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my strength. There was a loud, echoing clunk as the bolt finally retracted. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into darkness. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of damp earth, of decay, of time itself. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed shut for a very, very long time. I hesitated on the threshold, my heart hammering. Every instinct told me to turn back, to run. This was a place of endings, not beginnings. But the key felt warm in my hand. It was a promise. He said you always knew how to find things. I stepped inside. The ground floor was just as I remembered it, only more cluttered and decayed. It had been the garage and workshop. Old, rusted gardening tools leaned against the walls. Stacks of cracked terracotta pots were covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. In the faint light filtering through the grimy windows, I could see the outlines of two old stalls, where horses would have been kept a century ago. The air was cold and still. It was a tomb. My inheritance was a tomb. I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me. What was I doing here? This was a mistake, a cruel, pointless joke. My father, the man I remembered, would never have left me this. Maybe my brothers were right. Maybe he'd lost his mind at the end. Maybe he didn't love me as much as I thought he did. The thought was a physical pain, sharp and deep. I made my way to a rickety wooden staircase in the corner. It led up to the second floor, to the old apartment. I tested the first step with my foot. It groaned in protest but held my weight. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way up, my hand trailing along the dusty, splintered railing. The apartment upstairs was small, just 2 rooms and a tiny bathroom. It was even more depressing than the garage below. The furniture was a collection of rejects from the main house. A lumpy-looking sofa with a faded floral pattern, a wobbly kitchen table with only one chair, a rusty metal bed frame with no mattress. Everything was covered in the same thick layer of dust. A dead bird lay on the windowsill. I walked into the main room and dropped my cardboard box on the floor. The sound echoed in the silence. I stood in the middle of the room, turning in a slow circle. This was it. This was my legacy. A dusty, forgotten attic filled with junk. The $800 tax bill felt like a mountain I could never climb. The week I had at the shelter was already ticking away. I had spent almost a quarter of my money just to get here, to this dead end. I sank down onto the dusty sofa, not caring about the grime. I buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since I'd left the group home, I let myself cry. It wasn't a loud, dramatic cry. It was a quiet, hopeless one. I cried for my father. I cried for the little girl who had lost him. I cried for the teenager who had been abandoned by her brothers. And I cried for the young woman who was sitting in a derelict building with no future and no hope. I don't know how long I sat there. The light coming through the dirty windows began to fade as the afternoon wore on. The room grew colder. Eventually, the tears stopped, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. I was just so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of hoping, tired of being disappointed. I lay down on the sofa, pulling my thin jacket around me. Maybe I would just sleep here tonight. It was better than a shelter, wasn't it? At least here, the failure was mine alone. As I shifted my weight, my elbow knocked against the floor beside the sofa. It made a strange, hollow sound. Thump, thump. Different from the solid sound of the rest of the floor. I sat up, my heart giving a little flutter. I knocked again, my knuckles rapping against the old wooden floorboards. Thump. 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 Solid. I moved over a few inches. Thump, thump. Hollow. It was a small section, maybe 2 feet square, right next to the sofa. I ran my fingers over the boards. They looked the same as all the others, dark with age, the gaps filled with dirt. But one of them, right at the edge, seems to have a slight give to it. I dug my fingernails into the crack and pulled. Nothing. I looked around the room. In the corner, among a pile of junk, was an old, rusty tire iron. I grabbed it. It felt heavy and solid in my hand. I went back to the spot and wedged the flat end of the tire iron into the crack. I put my weight on it and leaned back. The wood groaned, then splintered, and then, with a loud crack, the board popped up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tossed the broken board aside and peered into the darkness below. There was a small, hidden cavity in the floor. And nestled inside it, wrapped in what looked like an old oilcloth, was a dark green metal box. It was an old military-style ammo can, heavy and solid. My hands were trembling as I reached down and lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. I set it on the floor and wiped the dust off the lid. There was no lock, just 2 sturdy latches on the front. I took a deep, shaky breath, my mind racing. What was this? What had my father hidden here? He said you always knew how to find things. With fumbling fingers, I flipped open the latches. They sprang open with a sharp, metallic snap. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money, stacks and stacks of it. Not new crisp bills, but old, circulated $100 bills bundled together with rubber bands. It wasn't a fortune, not like the money my brothers had, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I lifted one of the bundles. It felt impossibly real. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars here. Enough to pay the taxes. Enough to live on for months, maybe even a year. Enough to start over. But underneath the money, there was something else. A large, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper, the same kind as the lawyer's letter. My name, Chloe, was written on the front in my father's familiar, slightly messy handwriting. And next to it, a smaller, thicker envelope, sealed with a wax stamp bearing our family's initial, E. I pushed the money aside. The cash was a shock, a miracle, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was in this letter. This was the answer. This was the why. My fingers shook as I broke the seal on the larger envelope. I pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, at least 20 pages, all covered in my father's handwriting. I unfolded the first page and began to read. My dearest Chloe, it began. My little spark plug. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means you are 18. It means you are strong enough and clever enough to have found this place and this box. And it means I am gone. I am so sorry that I had to leave you. There is not a day that goes by, as I write this, that my heart doesn't break knowing I will not see you grow into the incredible woman I know you will become. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I wiped them away impatiently. I had to keep reading. I know you must have so many questions. I know you must be angry and confused. You must feel abandoned. I need you to know, Chloe, that none of it was what it seemed. Leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I did it to protect you, not from the world, but from your brothers. The words hung in the dusty air. Protect me from Mark and Stephen? I loved all my children, the letter went on, but I was not blind. I saw the greed in Mark and Stephen long before I got sick. They saw my business, my house, my money, not as a family legacy, but as a prize to be won. When I got my diagnosis, I knew I didn't have much time. I also knew that if I left you a traditional inheritance, a share of the money or the estate, they would have found a way to take it from you. They would have used their age, their lawyers, their ruthlessness to bleed you dry and leave you with nothing. They would have trapped you in their world of fighting and bitterness, and it would have destroyed your spirit. I could not let that happen. I sat back, the pages trembling in my hand. It was all making a horrible kind of sense. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had hidden me. So I made a plan, he wrote. A difficult, painful plan. I set up this carriage house in a separate trust, a legal fortress they couldn't touch. I made it look worthless, a piece of junk not worth fighting over. I left the taxes unpaid to make it seem like a liability. I liquidated some assets, quietly, over time. The cash in this box is that money. It's your start, Chloe. Clean, untraceable, enough to give you freedom. I had to let the state take you in. I had to let you think you had nothing. It was the only way to get you clear of the wreckage when the estate was settled. It was the only way to ensure your brothers wouldn't come looking for you, or for your inheritance. I chose a lawyer I trusted, my old friend Rob Henderson, and gave him strict instructions. He was to be my messenger, nothing more. The rest had to come from you. I had to trust that the smart, curious girl I raised would eventually find her way here. I had to trust that you would find this box. I lowered the letter, my head spinning. For 3 years, I had believed a story of abandonment. I had believed my father's illness had erased me from his mind, that my brother's greed had erased me from the family. But the truth was so much more complex, so much more painful, and so much more full of love than I could have ever imagined. He had orchestrated my time in the system. He had allowed me to suffer, to feel alone, all to protect me. The knowledge was a crushing weight and a profound relief all at once. I cried again, but this time the tears were for him, for the terrible choice he had to make. After a few minutes, I picked up the letter again. There was more. The cash will give you a new beginning, Sparkplug. You can go anywhere, be anyone. You owe this family nothing. But I have left you something else, a choice. Inside the smaller envelope is the real Easton legacy, and it is a heavy one. I looked at the smaller, wax-sealed envelope. It felt dense, solid. For the last 2 years of my life, the letter continued, while your brothers were so busy managing my failing business, they were also systematically stealing from it. They set up shell corporations, falsified invoices, and funneled millions of dollars into offshore accounts, all while telling me the company was on the brink of collapse from my medical bills. They were bleeding me dry, waiting for me to die. But I wasn't as far gone as they thought. I found it, Chloe. I found their trail. The small envelope contains everything: copies of the wire transfers, the fake invoices, the names of the shell companies, a ledger of every dollar they stole. It's all there. Enough evidence to send them both to prison for a very long time, and to reclaim every penny of the family fortune through the courts. I stared at the small envelope as if it were a bomb. Millions. He was talking about millions of dollars. The main house, the business, everything. "So this is your choice," my father's letter concluded. "It is the last and most important thing I can give you. You can take the cash from this box, walk away from Barrington Hills, and never look back. Build a life of peace, on your own terms. You have earned it. There would be no shame in that. Or, you can take the contents of that other envelope, go to the authorities, and take back what is rightfully yours. You can have justice. You can reclaim the Easton name and everything that comes with it. But it will be a war, Chloe. It will be years of lawyers and courtrooms and public accusations. It will drag you through the mud. It will consume you. I do not know which path is right. I only know that the choice must be yours. One path is peace. The other is justice. Choose wisely, my darling girl. Know that whatever you decide, I am proud of you. Know that I have always, always loved you. Your father." I dropped the letter. The room was silent, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of the decision my father had just laid at my feet. Peace or justice? Walk away or go to war? He had handed me a clean slate and a sword and told me to choose. For a moment, I was filled with a white-hot rage. I wanted justice. I wanted to see the smug looks wiped off my brothers' faces. I wanted to see them lose everything, just as I had. I wanted to see their perfect, manicured world burn to the ground. I reached for the small envelope, my fingers tracing the wax seal. I could do it. I could walk into the nearest police station and ruin them. I could take back the house, the money, the life that should have been mine. But then, I thought about what that would mean. Years of my life spent in depositions and courtrooms. My name, my trauma, splashed across the local news. I would be tied to them, to their greed and their crimes for the foreseeable future. I would be defined by the fight against them. My father's words echoed in my head. It will consume you. He had gone to such great lengths to get me free of them. Would fighting them just be another kind of trap? I looked around the dusty, dilapidated apartment. This was my inheritance. Not the money in the box, not the evidence in the envelope. It was this choice, the agency to decide my own fate. My father hadn't just left me money. He had left me a final lesson in what it meant to be free. Freedom wasn't about having everything. It was about having the power to choose your own path. I sat there for hours as the sun went down, the room sinking into a deep, cold darkness. The weight of the two paths pressed down on me. I thought about the girl in the group home, the one who learned to be small and quiet. I thought about the anger that had been my only companion on the bus. Was that who I wanted to be? A person defined by her grievances? Or did I want to be something else? What would you have done? I want you to think about it for a second. If you've made it this far in the story, it's probably because some part of this resonates with you. Have you ever been faced with a choice between getting even and getting free? It's not an easy question. Let me know in the comments what you think the right choice is. Justice or peace? Your answers matter because this community is about navigating these kinds of impossible questions together. And if you're finding value in this, please consider subscribing. We're building something special here, a place for stories that aren't afraid of the dark. Now, let's get back to that dusty room. As the moon rose, casting pale squares of light on the floor, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching sadness, and then something else. Clarity. My father didn't want me to be a warrior. He had to be one, fighting his illness, fighting to protect me. He wanted me to be a builder. The evidence in that envelope wasn't a weapon he was passing to me. It was a burden he was allowing me to set down. The real gift wasn't the chance to win back the past. It was the chance to build a future, free and clear. My brothers had already taken 3 years of my life. I wasn't going to give them another minute. I made my decision. I would not open the second envelope. I would not go to the police. I would not declare war. Their crimes, their rotten souls, were their own prison. They could live in that big, empty house with their stolen money, and they could have it. My inheritance wasn't in that house. It was right here, in this dusty, forgotten carriage house. It was a fresh start. I slept on the floor that night, using my jacket as a pillow, the ammo box next to me. It was the best I had slept in years. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. The room was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in my entire life. I found a small, rusted wood-burning stove in the corner of the room. I took the small, heavy envelope, the one with all the evidence against my brothers, and I placed it inside. Then I took the letter from my father, read it one last time, folded it carefully, and placed it on top. I used a few splinters of wood from the broken floorboard as kindling. I didn't have a match, but the ammo box had one more secret. Tucked into a small pocket in the lid was an old Zippo lighter. It was dry, but the flint still sparked. It took a few tries, but a spark finally caught the edge of the paper. I watched as the flames licked at the envelope, then at my father's letter. I was letting it all go. The anger, the revenge, the past. It all turned to smoke and ash, rising up the rusted stovepipe and disappearing into the morning sky. I was free. After that, things started to move. The first thing I did was walk back into town. I went to the county office, my heart pounding, and paid the $800 in back taxes with cash from the box. The clerk looked at me strangely, but she took the money and stamped my receipt. Just like that, the biggest threat was gone. The carriage house was mine, free and clear. My next call was to Mr. Henderson. "Ms. Easton," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I've made a decision, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "I'm keeping the carriage house. I want to live here, and I won't be pursuing any other claims against my father's estate." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. I think I was holding my own breath. "I see," he said finally, and then he added, his voice softer, "Your father would be very proud of you, Chloe. He hoped you would choose peace." Tears pricked my eyes. "He told you?" "He told me he was leaving you a choice," Mr. Henderson said. "And he told me he trusted you to make the right one for you. Now, about the deed. It's already in your name, but the property line needs to be formally surveyed and severed from the main lot owned by your brothers. It's a simple legal procedure. Your father already paid for it in the trust. I'll file the paperwork today." And just like that, the last tie was cut. My little 1/10 of an acre was officially my own country. The next few weeks were the hardest and best of my life. I used the cash from the box carefully. I bought a cheap mattress, a sleeping bag, and some basic cleaning supplies. I started the monumental task of cleaning out the carriage house. I hauled out bags and bags of trash, decades of accumulated junk. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and patched the leaky roof with tar I bought at the local hardware store. The owner of the store, a gruff old man named Sal, watched me come in day after day, buying sandpaper, paint, and nails. He never asked any questions, but one afternoon, as I was struggling to figure out which plumbing fixture I needed for the ancient sink, he came over. "That's an old compression fitting," he grunted, pointing. "You won't find one of those. You'll have to replace the whole trap. Here, take this one." He handed me a new PVC set. "No charge. Call it a welcome to the neighborhood gift." I was so stunned I couldn't even speak. I just nodded my thanks. It was the first act of unsolicited kindness I'd received from a stranger in years. Slowly, the carriage house started to transform. I painted the grimy walls a warm, creamy white. I sanded and sealed the wooden floors, bringing out their hidden warmth. I found a used armchair for $20 at a thrift store and put it by the window. It wasn't a palace. It was small and quirky and still a little bit broken. But it was mine. Every square inch of it. I never saw my brothers. I sometimes saw their expensive cars driving past the end of the lane, but they never came down the overgrown path. To them, the carriage house was still an invisible, worthless ruin. They had no idea I was there, living on the edge of their kingdom. And that was fine by me. I was building my own. One evening, there was a knock on my door. I froze. No one ever knocked on my door. I peered out the window and saw a woman standing on my doorstep, holding a casserole dish. She was my nearest neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who lived in the house across the street. "I see you've been working hard over here," she said with a warm smile when I opened the door. "I figured you could use a hot meal." I took the dish from her, the warmth spreading through my hands. It was chicken and rice. It smelled like heaven. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "We're glad to have some life in the old place again," she said. "If you need anything, just let us know." That night, I ate a home-cooked meal at my wobbly kitchen table, in my own home, and I knew I had made the right choice. My father had left me more than a house and some money. He had left me a community I could choose to be a part of. Months passed, turning into a year. The carriage house became a home. I got a part-time job at the town library, a quiet, peaceful place that suited me perfectly. I spent my free time working on the house, gardening in the small patch of land outside, planting flowers where there had only been weeds. I was careful with the money my father had left me, treating it not as a windfall, but as a foundation. It was the seed from which I was growing a new life. I often thought about what inheritance really means. I used to think it was about money, about property, about the things you are given. But I was wrong. My brothers had gotten the assets, but they had inherited the poison. They were trapped in a life built on a lie, always looking over their shoulders. They had the mansion, but I had the home. My real inheritance wasn't the carriage house or the cash. It was the story my father left me. It was the understanding that abandonment could be a form of protection, that loss could be a gift, that the most valuable thing a parent can pass down is not wealth, but wisdom. He taught me that true strength isn't about how hard you can fight, but about what you choose to build. He had let go of my hand so that I could learn to stand on my own. The carriage house was no longer a ruin. The roof was patched, the windows were clean, and the ivy had been trimmed back to reveal the beautiful old brick. It stood proud, a testament to second chances. It was a physical manifestation of my own healing. I had taken something broken and forgotten, and I had poured my love and my work into it, and I had made it whole again. And in doing so, I had made myself whole too. Standing here now, looking out the window that once held a dead bird, I see a small garden blooming with life. I see a home that I built, not with an inheritance of money, but with an inheritance of character. My father gave me a choice, and I chose peace. I chose to build, and it has made all the difference. This story, my story, is a testament to the fact that sometimes the things that look like endings are actually beginnings in disguise. It's about finding value where no one else sees it and building a future from the scraps that people leave behind. We can't always choose what we're given in this life. We can't choose the family we're born into or the losses we endure. But we can choose what we do with what's left. We can choose to let the past define us, or we can choose to build something new on the foundations of our own strength. So I want to ask you to do something. Look at your own life. What is the carriage house you've been given? What is the overlooked, underestimated, or broken thing that might just hold the key to your own freedom? Share it in the comments below. Let's fill this space with stories of resilience, of finding hope in unexpected places. Your story matters. And if this one has mattered to you, please subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home, and maybe we can help each other by sharing our maps. Thank you for listening.